Technology. All right, my name is Andrea Kuszewski, and among other things, I am a science writer, and I'm here to talk about science narrative and how you can use it to teach, excite, and most importantly, inspire action. So basically, we'll talk about what's the goal of science communication. Everyone has their own reason for being a science communicator. Depends on what you're in it for. Science literacy, basically a lot of the questions that came up after Michael's talk, I'm going to be addressing, so it was perfect timing. There's a lot of science that's being published that the general public doesn't understand, and how do we get that information out accurately? So science writers or filmmakers or people that do podcasts, one of the things they do is their main goal is science literacy, get the accurate information out there. Accessibility. The information is complicated, so how do you get someone who's a non-scientist to understand these really complicated things? And you lose the jargon, you talk about things as if you're speaking to a 12th grader, that's what I like to tell people. Not getting too involved in it, taking the main idea, breaking it down into its component parts, hitting on the bullet points. Reaching new audiences. My big thing is every time I write something, I'm always looking to broaden my reach. So I'm not speaking to my in-group, I'm always speaking to if someone has never heard of this before, how am I going to communicate this topic? And I think that's a big one with transhumanism because a lot of us, we've heard all the same stories before, we all know what each other are talking about, but how do we actually widen the community? So we have to think about people that have never heard of transhumanism, they don't even know what it is. How do we not scare them and get them excited about it and bring them into the community? So excitement, but the most important is how to inspire action. So I'm going to talk about wonder, and I think a lot of you have probably seen this image from the Imagination Foundation, and it's where you have the intersection of science and art, and you get that sweet spot in the middle, and that's wonder. And that's where people get interested in what you're talking about. Science is complicated, and art is exciting, and has that awe factor, and where those two intersect, that's wonder, and that's where you get people really curious about what you're talking about. At Science Online in 2011, Robert Krulwich, who has the show Radiolab, he gave this wonderful quote. He said, you can use plain language, you can use conversational voice, you can use humor, you can use music, but the best way to tell a science story every time is to give the audience the experience, if you can, of actually making a discovery on their own, that oh wow feeling. So basically, as a scientist, which I also am, the best thing about being a scientist is when you have that moment where you discover something. You have that aha moment. You're like, whoa, I just discovered this. It's so cool. No one has thought of it before. No one has seen this. And you want to just communicate that to the audience too. So you want to be able to incite that feeling of that oh wow feeling. And that's what that's where the wonder comes in. So how do we do this? We use story. Like PJ said, and like Michael had mentioned, telling stories and narrative is a good way to get people caring about what you're talking about. So you start with awe. That's the hook that gets people in. That sensational headline, the, oh my gosh, this is really awesome. So you start with awe, and that leads to wonder and curiosity. And that is what gets people thinking about it. So how do you go from wonder and curiosity to taking action? Well, you have to have personal relevance. If you have a story and you're talking about things in the abstract, it can be a really great narrative, but if it's so far out there that people cannot relate to it personally, they're not going to want to take action. They're just to say, oh, okay, that's a great story, and that's going to be the end of it. So we want action to follow. When I talk about action, you want people to not only adopt your idea, but you want them to make changes as a direct result. And that can either be a mind shift, whereas they change their ideology, or making changes to their personal life, or evangelizing your ideas to others. So as an example, I gave a talk at Humanity Plus in 2010 on how to increase your intelligence. And one of the things I didn't just talk about, here's the science that says, if you do these things, you can increase your fluid intelligence. What I did was I gave actual examples of how you can put those things to use right now in the audience. As soon as you walk out of the room, there are things you can be doing, and I gave specific examples of how they can start increasing their intelligence right now. And what happened from that is I got this flood of emails from people, which was really awesome, telling me that my presentation completely changed their life. They stopped using GPS, they stopped using spell check, and they started doing things immediately because they were following the advice that I'd given them. So I made it personally relevant to them, and they decided to take action. So when you're talking about transhumanism, we're talking about pretty radical science. And the more radical it is, the more difficult it is for people to relate to it on a personal level. So that always has to be paramount in your mind when you're talking about communicating these ideas. So what happens when you have too much of the awe factor and not the personal relevance? So what happens is, it's like, wow, this is like really cool, but I totally can't relate to it, but it's really awesome. It's like watching a movie, it's like watching a sci-fi movie, and you're entertained, but then you walk away. That's the end of it. So what happens? You don't have the relevance? Cool story, bro. Awesome. Great story, I'm walking away. So what happens is you turn the audience into spectators, not actors. You want them to be actors. So now if you think about in your personal life, what happens in relationships if you go too far over the top without that personal connection? I think you're really awesome and everything, but I just can't see myself with you. You've been put in the friend zone, okay? No one likes being put in the friend zone, so don't do it to science, okay? You want people to like what you're saying, be excited about what you're doing, but if you go too far over the top without making that connection, they're gonna put science in the friend zone. I also don't want to scare people with science. Science is pretty awesome. You know, I've been known to exclaim on Twitter, "Science!" 5 exclamation points. And science is great. But the thing is, science is awesome all on its own. You don't need to church it up. You don't need to go over the top. The stuff that we're talking about, 3D printed organs, limbs that you can control with your mind. These are all things that are incredible, all on its own. We don't have to take it so far beyond personal relevance that people just want to be spectators. So how do we make that transition from awe to draw people in to action? Let me give you some specific examples. 3D printed organs, okay? Pretty awesome. Now, do we need to talk about it like, we are now cyborgs, we have non-human parts, we have organs that are machines and all this stuff? People are gonna be like, well, that's really cool, but then they walk away. Or, if you wanna communicate that, how about you use a personal story? Your father had kidney disease. He was on a transplant list. He did not get his kidney. He's now dead, okay? What would have happened if we would have been able to print him a kidney? He wouldn't have had to wait 6 months, 2 years for a kidney. He could have had one in the here and now. You know, this stuff is happening today. It's happening right now. These things are going on, and it's implementable in our lifetime. But people don't see it as implementable because they don't have a touchstone that they can relate to. Another example, longevity. So, if you want to communicate to the public the fact that we're doing research that is going to increase longevity, what is the best way to do that? Man will be immortal, okay? We're all gonna be gods. I mean, okay, that's really exciting and cool, but do people really actually believe that? Or, if we want to communicate the very same research, how would you like to have 20 more healthy years to spend with your grandchildren? What would your life be like if you could go snowboarding with your great-grandchild? Wouldn't that be great? It might be possible. That's something that they can relate to. So connection drives action. So I guess as a science communicator, it depends on what you're in it for. Some people do just want to entertain. Some people want to drive action. Let's say you have a startup and what you do is you're trying to get people to adopt new technologies for organ transplant, 3D printed organs. You're going to want to have investors. If we're in a time of crowdfunding, you want to have a Kickstarter and you want people to donate to your cause, they need to have it be personally relevant to them, or why would they waste their money? They could just go to the theater and watch a movie. So the best science communication is a delicate balance of awe and reality. And you use the facts intertwined with a compelling narrative that people can relate to on a personal level. So, in closing, if you want to teach, excite, and inspire action, share that aha moment, have the rediscovery of wonder, allow the audience to feel the feeling that the scientist feels when they discover something. That's going to draw them in. Make it personal. Give them a story that they can relate to personally, or someone in their family. And don't put science in the front zone. If you have any questions, that's my Twitter handle.
All right. Any questions?
Yeah.
One thing I found, just to add to your great list, is the audience also appreciates and learns to trust you. You can also start to debunk, and this also points to what Michael was suggesting either. Debunkery articles, it can be just as informative and entertaining when you also expose some of the, let's say, inadequacies of science or scientists, whether it be exaggerated findings or whether it be exaggerated self-promotion and so on. So I think that's another kind of a narrative in science writing that's just as important as being somewhat of a cheerleader at the same time.
Yes, and the best way to gain credibility as an organization is to police your own. You know, just because we're all in the transhumanist community doesn't mean that everything that comes out of this community is going to be scientifically valid or correct. And when we see things like this emerging, it's our responsibility to point those out and to, bring the validity back to it. I'm kind of famous for telling it how it is in my field. And being in psychology, there's a lot of junk science out there. And so when I see it, the first thing I do is I jump on it and I say, hey, listen, yeah, this is an exciting headline. This press release is saying A, B, C, and D, but here's what's really going on. Now, I wish these sensationalist headlines were all true. It would be great. But, we got to be real about things. And if we keep it real and we do police our own, we keep things, filled with integrity, I think we're going to get further and we'll give more respect.
You still have about about 5-6 minutes.
Yeah, time for questions. So if anyone has a specific question about like a topic that
I've been I guess I've asked this question similar to Michael, but I want to get your impression, and that's the fact that people want to use, I guess, a little bit of hand waving in order to get heard. And to what degree is that harmful? And how do we know that people are only doing that? Like, you're a professional science writer, so you could probably pick it out a mile away. But how do people know that you're not quite being serious when you say the robots are going to take over the world? By the way, here's something else that's interesting that you should read. So the hooks, the romanticized and the exaggerated hook lines that we use. How can we keep them on balance, relevant, and exciting without being intellectually dishonest, I guess?
Well, I guess the best way is to, those headlines are very enticing, and I don't want to mention names, and this person's not here, so, but there was a very popular science writer who recently came out with a book, and a lot of people in the field were like, okay, a lot of what he's writing about isn't, it's crap. That's not real science, he's misinterpreting these studies, but he was extremely popular, and the general public who didn't know any better, they think it's terrific. They were eating it up like it was candy. And it took science journalists themselves to dig into this author's, what he was writing about, his history of writing, what was going on, and exposing basically a lot of fraud that he was doing. And that would never have come to light had the journalism community not jumped on that and said, hey, we deserve better than this. This isn't right. I don't want the public to come away with thinking that this is how we do things. We need a little bit of integrity here. So as a science journalist and as a scientist or someone in the community that just knows when you see something that's not quite right, pointing that out and bringing it to light immediately. I think that's the best way of countering that.
I've got an interesting problem, which I don't know how to deal with. Seriously, don't have any good ideas on it. It's this power satellite project, which has huge upsides, like $1 a gallon transportation fuels,
right,
that are with no carbon. You could actually take significant amounts of carbon, take it all out of the air if you really tried. It's got all sorts of neat things about it. It's got some real serious drawbacks to the thing. How in the world, particularly military ones, how in the world does one go about promoting it, selling it? Is it even a good idea to sell it? I don't know.
Here's the thing, and I think the climate scientists have kind of run into the same problem, where when you're talking about things on a global scale like that, something that's going to affect, the greater Earth, like 100 years from now, that is so far away from everyone's here and now. It's difficult for them to relate to it. So some advice I gave to someone who was writing about climate science, I said, okay, if these people are not really going to care about it, they just don't care, because what they care about is their family and them going to work tomorrow. They're not looking ahead to 100 years, what it's going to be like. Give them something that they can relate to. Ask them, how much was your heating bill last month? How much was your heating bill a year ago? How much has it increased? Well, do you know the rate the Earth is going right now? Do you know what your heating bill is going to be like in 5 years? Adjust for inflation. And that's something they can say, oh, wow, it's going to triple because the Earth we have global warming, all these things going on. What was it that got people to care about climate change? Hurricane Sandy. Right. Because their families, their homes were suddenly destroyed, and now it's personally relevant. In the abstract down the road, they didn't really care about climate change. It was there, but they understood it. They're like, cool story, but they didn't want to hear about it. But once it starts affecting them personally, suddenly now people are on board with it.
I'm thinking particularly that Sandy is one of the things that might kick this off.
Yeah. Yes.
How do you feel about science education today and related to your concerns about the public literacy?
It's pretty dismal compared to what it should be, but I guess I have hope for the future because there are more people. Blogging is becoming so popular that it's almost saturated out there with science blogging. And that's one of the things where when I tell people that are new science writers and they come to me for advice, like how do I even like get noticed? How do I cut through the noise? Using narrative is one of the ways to do that, because when science blogging first started, you would take a research article that was published and then you break it down and you publish it on your blog. And that was awesome because, you know, the average non-scientist wouldn't have had a way to access that information before. Well, now there's like hundreds and hundreds of people doing that, all these different, how are you going to break through that? And that's where narrative really comes in and is good to really capture that imagination and attention.
Yeah. So I read recently that the UK
Wait.
actually...
Your voice is too soft.
Careful. So I read recently that the UK is actually talking about legislating against free media as a result of some, I guess, abuses that have been put out through media like Murdoch. And I wondered if you have anything to say about that or comment. Do you think there should be any regulation in the press?
Yeah, I guess I'm not familiar enough with that to give a really good answer. I don't want to just like off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm not too familiar with that. In the UK.
I hear you. I said I just couldn't hear you through the microphone.
Oh, I said that I'm not familiar enough with the UK's policy that I can really answer that.
Do you have any opinions about media legislation in general?
I'd rather not comment on that. I don't want to open up a can of worms here, just due to my other jobs, but yeah.
Thank you.